Welcome, Annie Collins here for Brutus Monroe. Today we're going to create this piping card. Let's go over the products I used to create this card. Baked Fresh stamp set. This is a 6x8 set. We're going to use our pie and our pie slice. And the sentiment that reads, I only have pies for you. We're going to use our Aqua Pigment watercolor paper. So we're going to use that along with our Pigment palette. This is part of our stick and stamp mat. We'll use our stick and stamp mat, our Raven detail ink. We're going to use our embossing powder in Raven, and we used our embossing ink for that. I used that to stamp and emboss our images on our watercolor paper. In Aqua Pigments, I have for you peach, orange, brown, penny, and is our metallic, and red. And I know I read all those off and white. I read all those off really quickly, but I'll have those listed below. We'll be using those to color in our images, and you'll see that in a few minutes. We'll be using those with our Aqua Pigment palette. We have for you Not Your Mama's Cardstock for our card base in white. I have 110-pound brown cardstock that I removed a wedge from the center. And then I have in like a goldenrod yellow this scalloped background, which I've die cut from my stash. We're going to use our Raven detail ink along with our pie slice to decorate that. A piece of orange scrap of pattern paper, a light yellow circle, a piece of that same yellow for our sentiment, and the brown wedge that we cut out of our Raven cardstock as a backer for our sentiment. So let's get started by removing everything here. And the first thing we're going to grab really quickly is our stick and stamp mat. Then we're going to get our yellow or goldenrod yellow here, cardstock. Now I want to keep my little scallops nice and clean. I don't want anything stamped on them. So I'm going to use some post-it tape to cover only our scallops. With our Raven detail ink, I'm going to stamp the little pie wedge all the way around. We're basically creating our own pattern paper. And I'm not going to color these pie wedges. I'm just going to stamp them on here. And I'm going in every which way just to create a fun, whimsical pattern. Once that's done, I'll remove the post-it tape, and I will remove that paper and set it to the side. I bring in the light yellow piece of cardstock, and I'm going to stamp our sentiment, which reads, I only have pies for you. And I will set that to the side. Now I will bring in our stamped and embossed images. I'm going to put a dot of each of the aqua pigments that I'll be using. So a drop of brown, orange, peach, a tiny little drop of red, and I'm going to color our images. For our first leaf that I did there, I colored that one with the red. For the second one I'm coloring now, I did a combination of the peach and the red. And as you can see, I start off by just adding clean water to our image, and then I pick up a little bit of the pigment and paint it in. This allows the pigment to flow nicely, not to just soak in to one area. For the pie, for the crust, I used the brown, and for the actual pie filling, I used a combination of peach and orange with a little tiny hint of red. That gave me the perfect pumpkin pie color. So as you can see right here, I have just mostly peach first, then I'll add a little bit of the orange, then I pick up the smallest bit of the red, and you mostly use it around to just give it a little bit of shadowing, but just to bring in that nice warm color that the pumpkin pie gives you once it's baked. And then for our whip topping, I'm just going to use a little bit of white. I just want it to be more prominent here. Now this dries pretty quickly, so I'm just going to let it dry on its own. Now for a little extra something, I'm going to use our metallic pigment here, which is called penny, and it's basically a copper color like a penny. And I'm just going to add a little water to it, make it even more loose so that I can create splatters. So I'm going to splatter all of my images really quickly here. Now I got a couple bigger splatters on my pie, and I remedy that just by picking it up with a paper towel here in a moment. I'm also going to bring in that panel that we stamped all of our little pie wedges on, or pie slices, and I'm just going to do the same thing, splatter it with a little bit of penny all the way around. We're just going to add that just for some whimsy, for some fun. That is completely optional. If you're not a splatter person, by all means, don't splatter. Alright, so there we are. As you saw, I picked up some of that extra splatters from the pie. Excuse me, I have a cold, so please excuse my scratchy voice here. So I'm going to add a few more drops here onto my images. And I'm just going to set that aside to dry. Once it's dry, I will fussy cut these. Now, there are coordinating dies for this set. Unfortunately, I do not have them, but you can purchase them at the Brutus Monroe site. I will link them for you below. So now it's time to go ahead and put our card together. Here's my pie all fussy cut out. To hide all the white edges, I use a little Memento black marker, and that just crisps up my edges to keep all that white fussiness out. Alright, so I have some foam adhesive behind our pie, as you can see. I have some little coordinating tiny sequins as a finishing touch. So we start by adhering this goldenrod colored pattern paper that we created. We're going to adhere that to our brown cardstock. Press that in place, and I'm using Barely Art liquid glue for this. I'm going to adhere our front panel to our card base. Yeah, again using Barely Art. I use Barely Art for all my card making, and except for when I use foam adhesive. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and press this down into place. And then I'm going to go ahead and adhere this scrap of pattern paper. This scrap of pattern paper is from Echo Park. I've had it in my stash for a while. It's from one of their fall collections. I'll list it in the description below, but this is a good way to use of any little scraps of pattern paper that you may have. And if you're not a pattern paper person, by all means use cardstock. Alright, so now I adhere that pattern paper, I adhere the circle on top, and now I'm adding our pie pieces. I'm going to use our sentiment to kind of guide me as to where to put this last piece of pie. Once I get that in place, I know where my sentiment's going to go. As for our sentiment, I went ahead and fishtail one end, then I adhered it to the brown cardstock, trimmed it so I have just enough of a little border all around. And then I just adhered it to our card. Gonna tuck one of our leaves up here, and then finally our red leaf I'm going to tuck just below our sentiment and our big pie. Just a matter of working out the placement. I kind of moved it around a bit until I got it where I wanted it. Once I have that adhere in place, there we go, I'm going to add those finishing touches with our tiny sequins. Again, if sequins are not your thing or extra embellishments, then you would call your card finished at this point. But I like to add those little extra touches. So I'm going to add here a few of these little sequins all around our sentiment and our image on our card. So I do that by putting a tiny drop of Barely Art glue and then drop the little sequins onto it, pressing them in place with my embellishment wand. And since they're tiny, they kind of stick to my hands more than the glue, but I finally get them on there. Maybe sequins aren't your thing and you like enamel dots, that would work just as well. You know, any finishing touch, or again, if you're not a dimensional finishing touch person, leave it off. It's your card. Make it how you like it. So now our card is complete, and it went pretty quickly. The aqua pigments dry really quickly. They're watercolor pigments. Alright, so let's again go over what we use. Our stick and stamp mat, our aqua pigment palette, aqua watercolor paper, aqua pigment watercolor paper, our fresh baked stamps, embossing powder in Raven embossing ink, Raven detail ink, and our aqua pigment, which I did brown, orange, peach, penny, white, and red. And I know that's a lot. Again, I'll have those all listed and linked for you in the description box below, along with all the items I used for this. There's some nice dimension to this card, but not so much that it's not excessive to mail. So I hope you found some inspiration. Thank you for being here. Here's the last few looks of our card.